It's just the kind of topic we need on a cold, frosty morning when everybody's thinking about demons and fleeing witches and the threat of death and nuclear bombs and all those things that our world are crazed with at the moment. However, it's what the election has thrown up for us, and my wife's had a cold for 10 days, and I woke up this morning with something lurking around myself. So if I don't get quite to the point, it's a demon. The question we're asking today is, what is the point of the craziness of life, especially when political life becomes so kind of powerful and so demonstrative of violence and evil and destruction and all those things that terrorize us. We look at our lives and we think, well, what's the point of all of this? Or more particularly, we look at God and say, God, what on earth are you doing? Where are you? Why aren't you doing something about this? And of course, if God is the God of absolute power, there's probably great truth in that. Who have asked or asked God recently, what does he think he's doing, allowing these certain things going? We're all doing it. We're all in that constant place of trying to work out where is God in the midst of all this insanity, this violence, this unrest, this destructive power that's unleashing itself upon the earth. The reality is, right from the very beginning, these realities have been with humanity. That's the point of the Elijah story. There'll always be a Jezebel that wants to rid the land of the prophets of Yahweh, and there'll always be the prophets of Yahweh that want to slay every god of the Baalites. And so there's this animosity between the gods that cause this huge tension, and if we read these stories carefully, we know underlying those tensions is a deep sense of terror. I'm going to kill your God and get rid of your priest before they get hold of my God and kill him. And so there's this great fear in Islam at the moment of the Jews, who have got huge strength and huge power. But there's huge terror on the side of the Jews regards Islam because of their philosophical differences and their desire to see Israel annihilated. There's no way a rational preacher can come into this argument and say, well, I have the right scenario, I have the right position. And none of us can find that rightness and say, well, our way is right and everybody else's way is wrong. I'm legitimate in killing all the prophets that don't adhere to Christ. And then those prophets who don't adhere to Christ immediately turn and say, well, we're going to get you first. And so terrorism and all these things that strike terror, and these are all manipulated in order to get us to a place where we can't see rationally. We're like the demoniac in the garden. If you understand the demoniac in the first century, there's no context in the first century of the demoniac being filled with a demon that comes from this hellish place. The concept of the demoniac is nothing like that. The understanding that the first century had of demoniacs was that the demoniac was somebody who was filled with unexplained terrors. And so those terrors come into the person and disarrange the mind and make them do things. And in this case, he was naked and he was in the tombs and he was slashing himself and he was violent and everybody was afraid of him. But when Jesus had finished with him, he was in his right mind. It says he was clothed and in his right mind. Where was his trouble? It was in his mind. His mind had been terrorized by certain things that we don't know about, just like the minds of many of humanity today are totally terrorized with the events that are happening in our world today. And when our mind is terrorized, when we are under threat of terror, our whole protective mechanism comes into play, and we want to fight that terror. We want to give it back. We want to destroy it before it destroys us. And so we get these great conflicts. We saw that beautifully in the movie Bonhoeffer the other week, although they undid, I think, the terror that Bonhoeffer went through. When you read his stories and you read his theology, especially his ethics and the struggles that he went through, there was huge anxiety in his life. How can this third Reich develop in the name of God and be so against the principles that Christ taught? And so this terror from one wanted to kill it. And so he got involved in the plot to kill. And so this thing became self-gratifying. He wanted to kill once before they killed him. And so you get this kind of manic behavior that takes place. However, in the biblical argument, there is something that we need to be thinking about this. And I'm going to have a little look at a book in the Bible which we very, very rarely read. And the book is called I Will Hide My Face. Which book am I referring to? Which book in the Bible is called I Will Hide My Face? Well, that's the name of Esther. I will hide my face. Now, it's an extraordinary story. It's the story that the Jewish people celebrate at Purim. This is the feast. It's a bit of a... Purim is a strange Jewish feast. Most Jewish feasts are solemn assemblies. Purim is like a clownly enacting. It's like Purim is saying you eat and you can drink what you like and you have fun and you dress up in weird colours and you see Jerusalem streets at Purim and that there's strange kind of behaviours going on. And it's kind of celebrating around the idea that, and the only book that's allowed to be read in Purim, of course, is the book of Esther. And Esther is a comic story. If it's read in the Hebrew, it's constructed like a comedy. And it's all about this man who thinks he's a king. His name is Ahasuerus. I'm not going to say that name again because I memorized it this morning before I got out of bed, and now I've almost lost it. But we'll call him the king. And he was a legitimate king. He became king. He was of a Persian empire at the time of the exile. While the exile was finishing. And he had a wife called Vashti. Vashti was the real leader. She was the real queenly dignitary. She had all the nous of a good queen, and she was really the one who understood the royal household more than the king did. The king was an idiot. He was a total idiot. And he said one day to Vashti, he said, I want you to dress in all your splendor and come into the throne room because I got the boys around. And so they waited and they waited and they waited, and Vashti didn't arrive. So he kills her, has a kill. She's slaughtered. And then there's these two. The king has an advisor. Really, he's not a prime minister. He's an advisor called Haman, and Haman is out there, and he's a bit of a plotter. And there's another guy out there as well, a Hebrew guy called Mordecai. Mordecai was under huge threat because Haman wanted to see every Jewish man, woman, child slaughtered. He wanted the Jews to be totally eradicated, and he was undermining the king to get this to happen. However, he was the stepfather or the mentor of this very beautiful Hebrew woman called Esther. I will hide my face. And Esther has got the eye of the king after his wife has been destroyed, Vashti. And Esther has the eye of the king. But there's huge violence going on in the city. Everybody is being threatened, and there's Hebrews being killed. And Mordecai comes to Esther, dressed in robes, and he knocks on the gate of the enclosure where she is, and he says to Esther, Esther, I think you need to go and talk to the king about what's going on. And Esther said, well, how can I talk to the king? He will kill me. Nobody can go into the king's presence uninvited. And so there's this huge dialogue going on between Mordecai and Esther. And in the middle of it, Mordecai says these famous words. He says, Esther, I want you to think about this. Go into the king's presence and wear your best clothes and talk to him. Who knows, he says, you might have been born for such a time as this. That's the key phrase in the book. But the real phrase isn't that you'll know what's going on. The real phrase is this whole idea that that where Mordecai says, who knows, maybe, who knows. There's a real uncertainty in this book about the outcome, but Esther is put into this place and she fasts for 3 days and for 3 nights. She eats no food. She is terribly worried. She has an issue of blood, the text says, and that would normally be an idea that's given to the menstrual pain, but it can also refer to an agony of miscarriage. And it's like in the midst of this, what's going on and what's going to go before her, she's in this deep anxiety. She's in this deep terror. If I go in, and it's like this she's miscarrying a child. There's the pain of labor. There's all this going on, and she comes to this place in the end where she settles herself, and the text says she clothes herself in majesty, and she enters into the king's chamber. The king has the option then to lift his scepter and invite her in, or to put the scepter down and she will be annihilated. The king, in the miracle of the story, with all that Esther has gone through, raises the scepter and she goes in, and of course the nation is saved. I say this story because it's one of the most important stories in the Old Testament. But the extraordinary thing about this story, the whole book, 9.5 chapters, God's name is never mentioned or referred to once. God's name is not there. Not only that, there is no excitement to prayer in the story. There is no prayerfulness. There's no conversation with God. There's no giving your life to God. There's no God giving life to you. It's like God is absent. His face is hidden. And of course, that's the point of the story. That's why the title of the queen that becomes a queen is Esther. I will hide my face. And sometimes in the midst of some of the most terrorizing situations, it seems to us that God has hidden his face. There's no prayer, there's no mention of God, there's this blank space. We get the exact same situation many, many, many times in the Old Testament, and in the New Testament we're going to see as well. But the one about Elijah is really important, because here the same violent scenario is enacting. The prophets of Baal have been slaughtered. Now the king Ahab, who's the Jewish king, who's married this Gentile woman, Jezebel, and she is saying to the king, "We're going to." She's the real power behind the throne. It's similar to Esther's story, and so in the story, she makes this threat with all the energy that the government and the king could generate in the time. And then we see this man who's killed all the prophets of Baal. Now he's in this place where he withdraws into himself, and terror strikes his heart. It paralyzes him. And so he goes underneath the broom bush first, and he's in this place of terror. And an angel comes and visits him and says, "Rise and eat, because you're going to go on a 40-day trip." And he repeats the trip that Moses made to Mount Horeb in the Sinai. And it's like he's repeating this trip into Mount Horeb. And there he meets God again. And God says, "Well, what's actually going on, Elijah? What's happening to you?" And he said, "God," I'm using my words now, "I'm terrorized. Everybody wants me dead. I've done what I thought you asked me to do, and everybody's against me, and my life is under threat, and I just want to curl up and die." And he's in this cave in the mountain. And so he's going through that same process that Esther went through. This deep terror is ripping his gut out. And he's internally bleeding, as it were. He's hemorrhaging. There's this great angst that's taking hold of him. And God does this extraordinary thing. He says, "I'm going to show you who's the boss." And there's this huge, violent wind that shakes, rocks fall from the mountains, roll down Horeb and around his cave, and but God's not there. There's this raging earthquake that also, in the text, dislodges rocks, and God is not there. And then there's this flaming, roaring, gushing fire. Nothing like the tongues of fire we see at Pentecost. This is a damaging, destructive force that's coming against the life of Elijah, and he is not hearing or seeing anything of God in it. And then the most extraordinary thing happens, as with Esther. There is absolute stillness. There is a quiet that descends, that becomes audible. And in that place of stark quietness, the still small voice of God begins to speak. And it doesn't speak externally. It doesn't speak to Jezebel. It doesn't speak to Ahab. It doesn't even speak to the Baal community that is now ruling Israel. But it's speaking to the internal world of Elijah. And I have a bit of a feeling. I have more than a feeling. I have quite a lot of knowledge about this because I experience it myself, and I'm hoping that we're all in the same camp. We often think in terms of violence. We think in terms of storm and violent wind. We think in terms of earthquake. We think in terms of fire. Get rid of the enemy. And God is saying, hold on a minute, I'm not really that interested. If I wanted the enemy dead, I could do something about it in the moment, in the twinkling of an eye, I could annihilate the enemy. I'm interested in what's going on inside of you. And you've been so terrorized by the circumstances around about you that you can't even discern the hidden face of God. And so that invites us to think, well, what is this hidden face of God? The Psalms speak about it all the time. The Midrash, which is the commentary, the Jewish ancient commentary on these books, it talks about with Esther, that wonderful psalm which says, my God, why have you forsaken me? And it's like Esther is not praying it because there's no word of this, but in her actions, she's in this place, my God. She can't even speak it. It's not spoken. But there's this deep sense, why have you forsaken us? Why are you allowing this to happen? And then the still small voice when she clothes herself in majesty. And that's a word that would say, the Midrash says, it's like she clothes herself in the spirit. She clothes herself in all that she imagines God to be. And she says, well, God, it's not me that can face the king. It's only you that can do the real work of transforming this community. And so we see this extraordinary internal work going on. The Midrash would also say this. They say that the book of Esther doesn't fit anywhere in the text of the Hebrew scriptures. It's one of those books that doesn't have a fitting place. But there's one thing that it does. It calls, and Esther also calls Esther the last of the prophets. She's the last prophetic voice. And the Midrash says Esther is the last of that prophetic voice that speaks about God and violent miracles and the parting of the sea and the bread in the wilderness and all these wonderful miracles that happened. But the Midrash says there's going to come a time when those dramatic prophetic miracles are going to cease and the wisdom of the sages is going to take over. And the Midrash says this, we're very loath to give away the miracle because we don't want the quietness of wisdom to rule us. We would rather have the dramatics of it all. This is what the New Testament faced with Jesus. Jesus was prophetic in that there was miracle after miracle after miracle, which we're going to refer to this one a wee bit in a moment. But then when in the Acts there's 1 or 2 at the beginning of the book, but by the end of the Acts, there's no more miracles. The text has become written. And the wisdom of God is in the text, and the wisdom of God is in the voice of the sages. And it's no longer the miracle that draws our attention, but it's our sitting quietly with the text and letting it do that work inside of us that transforms us into the people of God. The miracle can't do that. The miracle can get our attention, But as the Midrash says, the prophetic voice needs to give way to the voice of the sage. And the voice of the sage is the voice of wisdom that begins to discern and understand what's actually going on in the radical life of the individual, and how that affects the community's inner life and how the community does its business. Let's finish quickly with the Gadarene. This man who is tormented with legions of devils. In the sense, his whole life has been ravaged, and he's had earthquake, he's had storm, he's had fire in his life. His mind is a total mess. He's totally outside of his mind. Jesus sets foot in that part of Caesarea, and he immediately is confronted by this man. This man says, simply, are you also going to torment me? Are you going to do something else to make my life more miserable? And it's like a plea. It's not an accusation. It's not in the accusative voice. It's a plea. Don't torment me. I beg you, the text says. I beg you, don't torment me. One more torment and I'll be out of it. And so there's a deep sense now where Jesus had already cast the demons out when he said this. They hadn't moved. But in the midst of this, the demoniac realized there was a presence in the room that was different. This man had come not to torment him. This man had come to do him good. And so his mind comes right. The devils leave, go into the pigs. That's another story. It causes angst and causes all sorts of problems with the swine herders. And then this man is sitting at Jesus' feet. That's the posture of a disciple. I want to follow you, Jesus. You've got the life that can change, remove the terrors of my heart, remove the terrors of my mind, those things that are causing me to enact life in all these weird, strange, delusional ways. Now in his right mind, he wants to serve. He wants to follow because he knows this man has an ability to move him into new spaces. The rest of the community, interestingly, the rest of the community are filled with the terrors that he was expelled from. They're filled with terror. They see what Jesus has done. And rather than say, Jesus, come in and restore our lives, they could only see their swines being damaged. They could only see their livelihoods go. And there's this deep sense to get out of here because you're just screwing our nation up. And so when the texts we're looking at today ask us to do this internal kind of examination, ask us to find this stillness where God speaks to the internal world, then and only then, I believe, will that violence of speech begin to be eradicated. Some of us have such strong, violent anger about what's going on that we've become part of the problem, because that doesn't solve the problems of the world. It just polarizes people into saying, well, I'm on the Israeli side now, or I'm on the Iranian side now. And so we're still at violence. We still want to see one go in place of the other. But the reality with Christ's rule is that he deals not with the geographics. It seems like I can't name any place where God deals with global kind of situations and suddenly brings a peace, not until the second coming. What he's interested always in is the inner world of Esther, the inner world of Elijah, the inner world of the demoniac, the inner world of each one of us sitting here this morning. And I think this is a message for us if we're communicating the gospel in the midst of all this uncertainty. Because most people have an attitude, or they have an idea about what's going on in the world, and they've chosen sides. But what they want most desperately is to find that inner fresh freedom, to find God in the midst of all this. And until their world is silenced and comes to a place of silence, that won't happen. Living God, we thank you for your word that is always a challenge to us. Your word always asks us to think beyond the words, into the world of the sage, into the world of wisdom, into the world where our inner life is transformed because your great grace meets with us and enables us to find a freedom of terror because your great grace washes and sweeps through us. Bless each of us this morning, Lord, as we navigate this difficult part that our world is going through, and keep our hearts, Lord, free from the terrors that rule these great nations, we pray. In Jesus' name.